Alara knew the precise moment the world was ending. It didn't come with the clash of swords or the roar of a dragon. It came with the deafening silence of a city's heart being torn out. From the rooftop garden of the Solar Coven's high spire, she watched as the city of Ethelwood, a jewel of light and commerce, was swallowed by a creeping, inky blackness. It wasn't a shadow. It was a void. Buildings crumbled into dust, street lamps flickered out like dying fireflies, and the screams of 1,000 people were muted to a single horrifying whisper. It was the maelstrom. The very thing their ancient, half-forgotten pact with the moon witches was meant to prevent. The veil is failing, her matriarch, the severe and unbending Solara, stated in a voice that was too calm for the impending apocalypse. It has been a matter of when, not if. Alara's hands were already glowing, her sun magic flaring to life. A pulse of pure golden light shot from her palms, an instinctual reaction to the creeping darkness. It hit the edge of the void and shimmered, a desperate, beautiful battle. But the darkness consumed it, indifferent and relentless. "My light is useless against it," she said, her voice tight with frustration. Her magic, forged from the sun's raw power, was designed to create and heal, not to battle an absence of existence. "It is not your light that is required," Solara said, her gaze fixed on the unfolding calamity. "It is the combined power of both sun and moon, a pact we swore in blood, then foolishly broke." Just as Ethelwood vanished completely, a figure appeared on the opposite spire. Lyra. Lyra of the Lunar Coven. She was a stark contrast to Alara's sun-kissed hair and golden robes. Lyra was the night-given form, with hair like spun moonlight and robes the color of a starless sky. She was as cool and distant as the moon she drew her power from. Alara had only seen her at the rare, strained diplomatic meetings between their rival covens, and even then, Lyra's presence was a study in disdainful silence. But now, she was here. Her hands were wreathed in shadows, tendrils of darkness that danced with a cold, pale glow. Her face, usually a mask of stoicism, was etched with a grim determination. "The Grand Matriarchs have spoken," Solara said. "The pact must be sealed by a hand of sun and a hand of moon. You will go with her." Alara's breath hitched. Go with Lyra? The thought was absurd. Their covens had been bitter rivals for centuries, their philosophies and magic diametrically opposed. Sun witches were taught to be open and passionate, to channel their power through creation and light. Moon witches were taught to be secretive and controlled, to draw their power from the unseen and the cold logic of the night. Matriarch, she is of the moon. "We are not allies," Alara pleaded, but Solara's resolve was iron. "There are no allies or enemies left, child. Only those who will stand against the maelstrom. The future of our world depends on you. Go now." The ground trembled. A new patch of void, a hungry black wound, appeared a few blocks away. Alara had no choice. She took a deep breath, and with a flare of her golden magic, she launched herself into the air, flying across the gap between the spires. She landed a few feet from Lyra. The air between them crackled, not with magical harmony, but with friction. Alara's aura of warmth pushed against Lyra's chill. "Don't get in my way," Lyra said, her voice like a sliver of ice. Alara's retort died on her lips. She wanted to argue, to challenge her, to demand to know what a moon witch knew of saving a world. But the maelstrom was spreading. There was no time. The pact had been shattered, and they were the only ones who could try to fix it. Their training began in a fortified neutral monastery in the mountains, a place of silent stone and ancient magic. It was the only place their combined energies wouldn't tear the world apart, or so the Grand Matriarchs had decreed. Lyra and Alara were given a single room, a single training yard, and a single purpose: to seal the veil. Their first attempt was a disaster. They were told to combine a simple spell of protection. Alara instinctively called upon the warmth of a shield of pure light. Lyra, just as instinctively, wove a barrier of defensive shadows. When they tried to merge their magics, the light and Shadow didn't meld. They repelled each other with the force of a magical explosion. The monastery's walls groaned, and both witches were thrown across the training yard, scorched by their own clashing forces. "You're too loud," Lyra said, picking herself up with a grace that seemed impossible for someone who had just been thrown. Her dark robes were singed at the edges. "And you're too cold," Alara shot back, shaking her head. Her golden tunic was smeared with soot. "Your shadows snuff out my light. How are we supposed to work together when your magic is the opposite of mine?" "That is the very nature of the pact, you simpleton," Lyra retorted, her eyes narrowing. "The sun and moon do not merge. They balance." Balance. The word hung in the air, a foreign concept to both of them. Sun witches were taught to dominate with their light, to push back the dark. Moon witches were taught to embrace the shadows, to find strength in subtlety. They had been raised to see the other's magic as a threat, not a compliment. The next few days were a frustrating cycle of failed spells and escalating arguments. Alara would try to create a vibrant, growing plant, and Lyra's encroaching shadows would make it wither. Lyra would attempt to scry for a lost artifact, and Alara's bright magic would blind her and obscure the vision. Their magical personalities mirrored their actual ones. Alara, full of restless energy and quick to anger, would pace and yell. Lyra, calm and reserved, would observe Alara's frustrations with a detached, clinical gaze that infuriated her even more. One evening, after a particularly explosive failure that had cracked a stone pillar, Alara collapsed onto the cold stone floor, defeated. "This is impossible," she whispered. Lyra, sitting in a corner, didn't respond. Alara expected a cutting remark, but none came. The silence was broken only by the soft, rhythmic sound of Lyra's breathing. After a while, Alara looked up and saw that Lyra was sketching intricate patterns on a piece of parchment, her movements precise and deliberate. "What is that?" Alara asked, her voice soft with exhaustion. Lyra didn't look up. "The patterns of the maelstrom's corruption. My coven has been tracking its spread for years. It's not just a void. It's a living wound in the fabric of our world, Ori." The first time, Alara saw past the cold facade. She saw a deep, intellectual focus. The patterns Lyra drew were not just lines, but a complex tapestry of magical decay. It was a language Alara had never been taught, and she felt a flicker of respect, followed by a deeper sense of dread. "We can't stop it with raw power," Lyra said, finally looking at her. Her gaze was not condescending, just direct. "We must understand it. The pact is not about power. It is about harmony. My shadows protect and contain. Your light cleanses and empowers. They are two halves of a whole, designed to work together, not against each other." The words were a revelation. Alara had always been taught to push and to dominate with her power. Lyra had been taught to contain and to hide. They had been fighting the wrong battle, and the realization hit Alara with a profound shame. "So, what do we do?" Alara asked, her voice small. Lyra met her eyes, and for a brief, fleeting moment, Alara saw something other than coldness. She saw a shared burden. "We learn to dance," Lyra said, "not fight." The word dance became their new mantra. The next day, Lyra began to teach Alara the ways of the moon. She showed her how to draw power not from a blinding, burning sun, but from the quiet, inner stillness of the self. She taught her how to weave a shield of shadow that didn't just absorb magic, but redirected it, bending it to her will. Alara, in turn, showed Lyra how to summon light that wasn't just a force of nature, but a tool for healing and growth. She showed her how to make a rose bloom from a withered stem, a skill Lyra, with her shadows and silence, had never even considered possible. Their progress was slow, filled with tiny, imperfect victories. A simple Lumina spell, one of Alara's first learned spells, was now something they performed together. Lyra would create a shadow cocoon around a fragile magical seed, protecting it from the chaotic energies of the world. Then, Alara would gently infuse the cocoon with her warm, nurturing light. The result was a flower of pure magic, a beautiful, impossible bloom that thrived in a perfect balance of light and dark. The act of working together forced them to talk, not about their magical training, but about their lives. Alara learned that Lyra's coven was not as secretive as she had always assumed. They were a tight-knit community, bound by a sense of shared purpose and a deep respect for the subtle energies of the world. Lyra, in turn, was surprised to learn that Alara's solar coven, with all its pomp and ritual, was not a place of unburdened freedom. Alara confessed to feeling stifled by their strict rules and formal expectations. They are so focused on tradition, Alara sighed one night, staring at the stars from the monastery window. They don't see that magic is a living thing, not a set of rituals. Lyra came to stand beside her, a rare show of proximity. My coven is too afraid of being seen. We are taught to be invisible, to leave no trace. It is isolating. The confession hung in the air, a moment of vulnerability that was both surprising and profound. Alara felt a surge of empathy. She had always seen Lyra as a cold, emotionless machine of a witch, but now she saw a person who was just as lonely and burdened as she was. Their magic continued to grow, fueled by this new understanding. Their combined spells were no longer a struggle, but a graceful, intricate dance. Lyra's shadows would weave a perfect, impenetrable cage, and Alara's light would fill it, not to burst it, but to illuminate it from within. A protection spell became a shield of pure harmony, a shell of darkness that absorbed kinetic energy, and an inner light that radiated out, cleansing and fortifying the user. One day they were practicing a complex shielding spell when a sudden surge of maelstrom energy, a phantom echo from the city it had consumed, pulsed through the monastery. The magical defenses of the ancient place flared and buckled. A section of the wall began to crumble, rocks falling into a chasm of pure shadow. Without a moment's hesitation, Lyra pushed Alara back and wove a powerful net of shadows, catching the falling rocks and freezing the chasm's expansion. The effort drained her, and she stumbled, her face pale. "Lyra!" Alara cried out, her fear overriding everything else. She rushed to her side, her hands glowing with healing magic. Lyra's coven was not taught to heal. They were taught to endure. Alara gently placed her hands on Lyra's shoulders, and her warmth seeped into Lyra's cold body. Lyra flinched, not from pain, but from the shock of the sensation. "It's all right," Alara whispered, a warmth in her voice she didn't know she was capable of. "I've got you." Lyra's eyes, usually so guarded, met hers. In them, Alara saw not just trust, but something else. Something deep and fragile and beautiful. Lyra leaned into her touch, and in that moment, the barriers between them, both magical and personal, finally dissolved. The pact had begun with a fight, but it was being sealed with a shared burden and the fragile, blossoming warmth of a burgeoning affection. Their new harmony was not to last. As they began preparing for the final ritual, a dangerous, all-consuming spell that would seal the veil, they felt a resistance, a subtle magical interference that felt both familiar and wrong. Their combined spells, once so flawless, began to falter again. Lyra's shadows would waver, and Alara's light would flicker. The problem wasn't their lack of skill, it was a foreign influence. "Someone is sabotaging us," Lyra said, her voice low and sharp. "The interference feels like our own magic, but corrupted." Alara felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. Who would do this? No one wants the maelstrom to consume our world. Lyra's gaze was direct and piercing. Only someone who fears our success more than they fear the end of the world. A member of one of our covens. The thought was almost impossible to accept. The Sun Coven was a place of honor and duty. The Moon Coven a place of stoic purpose. Who among them would sacrifice everything for spite? Lyra, with her scrying abilities, began to probe the magical currents around the monastery. It was a dangerous, exhaustive process, and Alara watched, a knot of worry in her chest. Lyra's face was a mask of concentration, but Alara could see the strain. "Lyra, don't push yourself too hard," Alara pleaded. Lyra was working herself to exhaustion, pushing her magic beyond its limits to find the source of the corruption. "I have to," Lyra said, her voice tight. "My coven trained me to be the best. I will not fail. This isn't about being the best. This is about trust," Alara said, her voice rising. "We're in this together, remember?" Lyra's gaze softened for a moment, and she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. She continued her scrying, and as she did, Alara sat beside her, her hand hovering near Lyra's, her own light radiating a soothing calm. Lyra drew on that warmth, a silent acknowledgement of the strength Alara's presence gave her. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Lyra gasped. The tendrils of shadow around her hands dissolved. "I found it," she said, her voice a strained whisper. "The source of the corruption is an amulet. It belongs to a sun witch named Seraphina." Alara's world tilted on its axis. Seraphina was a rising star in the solar coven, known for her ambitious nature and flawless magical technique. But she had also been deeply resentful of Alara's selection for the pact. Alara had always dismissed her jealousy as a minor annoyance, but to think it would lead to this. "She must have been trying to make our magic unstable, hoping we'd fail and the Grand Matriarchs would have to choose someone else," Lyra explained, her voice devoid of emotion, though Alara could feel the anger simmering beneath. "She is a fool. She cannot see that the maelstrom would consume her as well." The betrayal was a powerful blow to Alara. Her coven, her home, had a traitor in its midst. But the anger was quickly replaced by a fierce, protective love for Lyra. She had been wronged not just by a stranger, but by one of Alara's own kind. "We have to stop her," Alara said, her sun magic flaring with a new, resolute intensity. "We will," Lyra replied. "But not now. We cannot waste the time we have left on vengeance. We will face her after we save the world." Lyra's focus and resolve were a testament to her strength. She wasn't driven by petty emotion. She was driven by a deep, logical dedication to her duty. This realization, more than any other, shattered Alara's last preconceptions about moon witches. They weren't cold because they lacked feeling. They were controlled because their emotions ran too deep to be shown. "You're right," Alara said, her voice soft. She reached out and took Lyra's hand. For a moment, their hands were a perfect balance. Lyra's cold skin and Alara's warm touch. It was not a gesture of magic, but of comfort. "After all this is over, we'll face her together." Lyra didn't pull away. She squeezed Alara's hand, a small but powerful gesture of a promise that went far beyond their pact. The journey to the heart of the maelstrom was a pilgrimage into a dying land. The air grew cold, the light grew dim, and the land was a barren wasteland of cracked earth and petrified trees. They traveled on foot, their combined magic protecting them from the maelstrom's corrupting influence. Lyra's shadows wove a silent, invisible cloak of protection around them, while Alara's light kept the cold at bay and nourished them. They were a single unit, their magic flowing as one. Lyra would anticipate the maelstrom's insidious magical tendrils, and Alara would be ready with a blast of cleansing light to dissolve them. Alara would instinctively know when Lyra's energy was flagging, and she would gently transfer a fraction of her own, a silent, comforting exchange of strength. The center of the maelstrom was a swirling vortex of pure nothingness. The air itself was a vacuum, cold and silent. Lyra and Alara stood on the precipice, a small island of solid ground in a sea of non-existence. The final ritual was complex, a tapestry of intricate spellwork that had been passed down from the first sun and moon witches. "We must be perfectly synchronized," Lyra said, her voice low. "The ritual requires us to share not just our power, but our minds, our hearts, our very souls. Our auras must merge as one." "We've been doing that for days," Alara said, trying to sound confident, but a tremor of fear ran through her. This was the final step. Failure meant a world consumed. "There's one more part," Lyra said, her gaze fixed on the swirling void. "The final words of the pact are not a chant. They are a declaration of a truth so profound that it will resonate in the very fabric of existence. It must be something we have never said aloud, a secret of the soul." Alara's heart pounded. A secret? She had no grand, hidden truth, just a simple, powerful feeling that had been building inside her for weeks. It was the truth she saw in Lyra's eyes every time they worked together. the truth that had solidified when Lyra trusted her with the knowledge of Seraphina's betrayal. It was the feeling that Lyra was no longer a rival, but a partner, a friend, a person she couldn't imagine being without. They took their positions on the last solid ground. They began the ritual. Alara's sun magic created a fiery, intricate circle, a binding symbol of light. Lyra's moon magic wove a spiraling vortex of shadows around it, a containment field of pure darkness. The symbols, so opposite in nature, hummed with a perfect, elegant harmony. The ritual demanded that they open their minds to each other, sharing their thoughts and memories. Alara felt Lyra's mind open to hers, and she was flooded with Lyra's memories. The loneliness of her training, the fierce loyalty she felt for her coven, the quiet joy she found in the moonlit forest. And then, an image of Alara herself, laughing by the window, her golden magic shimmering in the air. Alara's heart ached with a sudden, profound understanding of the person she had so foolishly misjudged. Alara, in turn, shared her own mind. She showed Lyra the constant, draining pressure of being a sun witch, the weight of expectations, the fear of not being good enough. She showed her the frustration of her magic, which could create and nurture, but could not defend. And she showed her Lyra's face, etched in her memory, a constant presence that had become the center of her world. The maelstrom roared, a soundless scream of pure vacuum. The ground trembled. The final stage of the ritual was upon them. The secret, Lyra said, her voice a strained whisper, her hands shaking with the effort of holding the ritual together. Alara knew what she had to say. The truth was no longer a secret. It was a fire in her soul, demanding to be spoken. The words tumbled out, raw and honest. Lyra, I love you. For a moment, Lyra's eyes widened in surprise. The magical currents in the air wavered. Alara feared she had ruined everything, that her love was not a powerful enough truth, or that it had been the wrong truth to declare. But then, the corners of Lyra's lips turned up in a small, almost imperceptible smile. And with that smile, she spoke her own secret, her voice firm and clear, her shadows solidifying with a new power. Alara, she said, her voice filled with a powerful, beautiful vulnerability. I am yours. The magic roared. Alara's love, a blazing fire, met Lyra's truth, an unshakable force of will, and they merged. The golden light of her magic wrapped around the spiraling shadows of Lyra's. They were no longer two separate forces, but a single, powerful unit. The light didn't push the shadows back. It illuminated them, creating a spectrum of impossible, beautiful colors. The shadows didn't snuff out the light. They gave it shape and purpose. The combined force shot into the maelstrom. There was no explosion, no violent confrontation, just a gentle, absolute filling of the void. The maelstrom did not explode, it dissolved. The nothingness was replaced by a perfect, harmonious balance of light and shadow, and the veil was sealed. The ground beneath their feet solidified. The cold air was replaced by a gentle breeze. The sky, once a swirling vortex of black, was now a perfect canvas of stars. Lyra and Alara stood in the middle of a peaceful, empty land, their hands still joined. Lyra's gaze was soft, filled with a warmth Alara had never seen before. We did it, she whispered. We did it, Alara confirmed, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. A flash of movement made them turn. It was Seraphina, standing a few dozen feet away, her face a mask of rage and defeat. The amulet in her hand was shattered. How? She hissed, her voice filled with venom. My magic was perfect. It should have driven you apart. Your magic was driven by hate, Lyra said, her voice calm and firm. Ours was driven by a truth stronger than any curse. Seraphina opened her mouth to argue, but the grand matriarchs of both covens appeared behind her, their faces grim. They had been watching. They had seen everything. Solara, Alara's matriarch, looked at her with a new expression, not just pride, but respect. Lyra's matriarch, the silent and wise Lunara, simply nodded, a look of profound satisfaction on her face. Seraphina was dealt with swiftly, her betrayal exposed and her power stripped. The Grand Matriarchs then turned their attention to Lyra and Alara. "The pact has been sealed," Solara said, her gaze moving between the two witches. "The veil is safe, but this is not what we expected." "It is a better path," Lunara said, her voice a deep melodic hum that Alara found surprisingly comforting. "The old ways were a path of division. You have found a path of unity." The two covens, once separated by centuries of rivalry and resentment, began to move toward each other. The Moon Witches, once so isolated, opened their hearts to the warmth of the Sun Witches, and the Sun Witches learned to appreciate the quiet strength of the moon. Lyra and Alara were not just the saviors of their world. They were the living embodiment of a new era. "What will you do now?" Lyra asked Alara, her hand still in hers, their magical auras a constant, gentle hum of connection. Alara looked at the world they had just saved, at the sky filled with the promise of a new dawn. "I don't know," she said, her smile genuine and full of an unburdened happiness. "But I know I want to do it with you." Lyra's smile was a rare, beautiful thing that made her entire face light up. "Good. We have a world to rebuild. Together." Their love story, born from a shattered pact, had become the foundation for a new and harmonious future. The sun and moon, once rivals, were now a single beautiful constellation, illuminating a world that had been brought back from the brink of oblivion.